loquacious words, and worlds. Jack Vance's elevated diction, a study of a science fiction master's most well-regarded stylistic technique. Who was Jack Vance? Jack Vance, born in 1916 and running well into his 90s, was one of the most distinctive voices in speculative fiction. Over his lifetime, he published more than 60 books and possibly more under pseudonyms. His work spans science fiction, fantasy, and mystery. But what unites it all is his unique style: rich, elevated language, sardonic wit, and baroque world building. His Dying Earth series not only becomes a cult classic, but also directly inspired the original Dungeons and Dragons spell system, now known as Vancian magic. He was also a close friend of Frank Herbert, author of Dune, and a deep influence on later writers like George R. R. Martin, Gene Wolfe, and Neil Gaiman, all of whom praised Jack Vance's command of language and tone. In short, Vance wasn't just prolific, he was foundational to the modern genre of fiction. What is elevated diction? Elevated diction refers to the use of formal, ornate, or poetic language. Language that feels deliberately heightened and stylized. It often includes archaic or unusual vocabulary, the kind of words we rarely hear in everyday speech. You'll also notice more complete, complex syntax, longer, layered sentences that flow with a kind of deliberate rhythm. This kind of language helps create a tone that's grand, mythic, or otherworldly. It distances the narrative from the casual or the mundane, and in doing so, it enhances the sense that the reader is entering a world that operates on its own terms. Elevated diction is a conscious break from everyday speech, and that's what makes it so powerful in fantasy and science fiction. It signals that we're somewhere else entirely. Elevated diction in practice. Let's look at how elevated diction actually works in Vance's writing. In the first example, instead of saying Kugel thought about it, Vance writes, Kugel considered the matter, exhibiting an expression of grave sagacity. That's not just more elaborate, it's doing character work. Words like grave sagacity suggest a man trying to appear wise, maybe even more pompous. The sentence is theatrical, much like Kugel himself. Now, the second example. Vance writes, the sun, swollen and red, hung motionless above the horizon like an evil eye. Notice the metaphor. The sun is an evil eye, and how the sentence flows with poetic rhythm isn't just description, it's atmosphere. The plain version, the red sun hovered in the sky, gives us the facts, but not the mood. Elevated diction adds drama, tone, and a sense of grandeur. It's not just what is being said, it's how it's being said. Why use elevated diction in your writing? So why should we, as writers, consider using elevated diction in our own work? First, it builds immersive worlds, especially in genres like fantasy and science fiction, or historical fiction. Stylized language helps create a setting that feels distant, self-contained, and textured. Elevated diction becomes a part of the architecture of the world itself. Second, it's a great tool for defining character voice. A character who speaks with ornate, formal language immediately feels distinct. It can signal education, arrogance, eccentricity, or social status. And when contrasted with plainer voices, it makes dialogue richer and more layered. Third, it engages the reader intellectually. Elevated diction slows the pace just enough to invite attention to tone, nuance, and word choice. It rewards close reading, and that's often where the deeper meaning lies or the subtle irony lives. Fourth, it creates a unique aesthetic. Whether you're aiming for elegance, timelessness, or dry humor, elevated diction sets your prose apart. It signals control. You're not just telling a story, you're shaping its texture and tone deliberately. Fifth, and this is where Vance excels, it balances tone and irony. When elevated language describes something grotesque, absurd, or morally dubious, the contrast generates humor or critical distance. The style doesn't just ornament, it comments. Finally, using elevated diction well shows stylistic control. It's not easy to write formally without sounding clunky, so when done right, it demonstrates a command of vocabulary, rhythm, and sentence structure that can elevate the entire narrative voice. Elevated diction in world building. This passage is a great example of how elevated diction works on multiple levels. First, listen to the vocabulary. Sleeching, cloys, addles. These aren't modern or casual words. They merely create a formal, almost moral tone. The repetition of a surfeit of or gives a sentence a rhythmic, almost sermon-like quality. It feels like a proverb or timeless warning. Vance uses this tone to reflect on the decay of society, not just describing it, but judging it. Yet there's irony too. This high style contrasts with the absurd results like faddishness and the occult, adding dry humour. Notice how he builds upon the world without any direct exposition. Just through tone and word choice, we understand the society, indulgent, decadent, and detached. And finally, there's a deeper critique here. Not just of this fictional world, but of comfort and excess in any age. It's distant, but it hits close. Characterization through speech, irony, and humour. Jack Vance masterfully employs elevated diction, but not just for world building, but as a tool for this exact purpose. First, characters speak in excessively refined language to reflect their traits. Intelligence, vanity, and emotional attachment are all encoded in the way they speak. A pompous nobleman might describe a minor inconvenience as a grievous encroachment upon their dignity. Revealing not just this vocabulary, but this initiated self-importance. Second, Vance often places this formal language in petty or absurd situations, creating a strong sense of irony. When characters argue over trivial matters with the seriousness of a royal decree, the gap between tone and content becomes comedic. It's like watching a Shakespearean duel over who owns a slightly bruised peach. Third, insults and jabs are hidden behind layers of civility. What sounds like praise might actually be a subtle burn. Refined speech becomes a weapon. This creates dry humour and allows for clever, layered dialogue. A character might say, "Your ideas are a refreshing original if one has never read a book," and the target is left blinking at their backhanded slap. Finally, elevated diction can transform even threats or mockery into grand theatrical moments. A villain might declare, "I shall endeavour to end your misapprehensions permanently," turning menace into poetry. Technical challenges and counterpoints. Elevated diction is a powerful stylistic tool, but it's not without its challenges. First, it requires a very precise vocabulary and strict tonal discipline. Using the wrong word or slipping into casual language can break the effect. This precision can sometimes slow the pacing or make the meaning less immediately clear to readers. Also, because many characters may share this ornate style, keeping dialogue fresh and varied is essential. Otherwise, it risks becoming monotonous or repetitive. Another challenge is the potential to alienate readers who prefer the straightforward, conversational prose. Elevated diction demands more attention and patience, which not every reader is willing to give. As for limitations, this style can create emotional distance, which fits perfectly with Vance's often detached, ironic worlds, but may not work well for more intimate or emotional stories. It can also feel overdone, if not balanced carefully. Vance avoids this by mixing irony and keeping passages concise. Finally, elevated diction isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. It's not suited for every mood or theme, but it shines brilliantly when used with care and with satire, and used in satire, grandeur, or depicting cultural decay and excess. My application. Beneath the sheer brass domes of Ysilph, the court of the dowager ruler convened in silent opulence. Attendants and vermilion sashes whispered omens, and oligarchs argued over the crumbs at the feet of their mute master. Elsewhere, humid air currents whisked the titterings of servile homunculi through decadent rotundas and decorated plazas. Such was the palace of Ysilph, shackled in its omnipresent quietude. Lemaine stalked, his foot wrappings padding against the cool obsidian floor, mandated at the gates to keep the silence. Shrouded in a rattan Calicaster cloak, he affronted no attention. A rogue of ill repute, he dithered in the gilded halls, passing by unattended baubles and curios of indescribable wealth. If by some luck these mere trinkets slipped into his coat pockets, was of no concern to the constabularies. When the delicate tang of sweetmeats and the succulent draw of honeysuckle tickled Lemaine's senses, there was naught he could do but find himself hurrying down the stark halls of yourself to procure these delicacies, for he hungered greatly, for the niceties of affluence were denied to him by birth and caste. Soon it became the sauce, the clattering of pans, and the cries of cooks argued for the title of the noisiest in the palace. Homunculi lumbered in and out of the arched doorway, trays of delectable delights in their half-formed, gyroscopically stable arms, their fleshy bodies adequate only for toting their creator's banquets. Taking but one step closer, Lemaine was halted by a steel-plated chest that rasped ragged breasts. Quaking an eyebrow, Lemaine glanced up at the obstacle in the way of his just desserts. A purple-skinned brute of a creature with far too many automaton extensions. A guardian of yourself, the advanced homunculi glared down at Lemaine, drooling as it peeled its hideous lips back in a sneer. You, vagrant, not permitted. The misshapen beast gurgled. Vagrant! Lemaine spat. I'll have you know, I am but the finest manservant for a dear compatriot of our dowager ruler. Allow me passage. I must fetch the luncheon. Proceeding with his lie in full confidence, Lemaine strode forward. The half-life beast moved to block him. Lemaine stumbled into it with exaggerated force. An ancient ceramic trinket stowed on his person clattered to the ground, shattering instantly. No! You oaf! My master will have your parts scrapped and your meat repurposed, Lemaine said, doing his best to authenticate his outrage. The homunculi guard twisted its face into shock as it tried and failed to gather up the pieces with its blocky metal hands. Damn you, I'll be back, but my dear patron, strike me down to the sun not be blue, for my wrath is but a spittling of his. Stay here, post haste and guard this mess. Lemaine slipped out of the Sylph guardian's grasp and proceeded into the kitchen. My master will want to see you. If you value that purple hide of yours, stay out there. Do not impede me. Is that simple enough for you, Spawn? My personal takeaway of writing with elevated diction. In use, elevated diction is engaging to write with. It adds flavour without the need for lengthy description or a great deal of setup. I also found it added a layer of authenticity, despite being inexperienced myself with the elevated diction and world building. Like much of Jack Vance's incredible and diverse worlds, the archaic feel of the style added to the depth of the world. And the more bizarre, the better the style worked. Elevated diction in dialogue and character. Using this stylistic technique in speech was not as hard as it was in narration. A lot of what makes it work is how it enhances the scene's emotions and sounds more entertaining. It also shortens the need for description to just a few words, which allows me to do more with less space. The challenge of writing with elevated diction. It was not easy. I did not naturally have all of these words crammed into my brain. I had to find each word, understand each word, and then figure out how to best implement each one. If you notice, I was not able to keep up with the same level of elevated diction that Vance was being able to. Thank you. Elevated diction was a challenge, and it was fun, which is most important. However, I would not suggest creating a first draft in this style, unless you really want to. Thank you again.